Have you ever wondered why celebrities changed their names after entering the industry? How Hollywood helped mold Marilyn, Audrey, Joan, Judy, and so many others into legends? In Hollywood's golden era, identity was a currency. Behind every glittering marquee and timeless face was often a carefully crafted identity, names chosen not by birth, but by strategy, survival, and star power. In Golden Age Hollywood, a name could make or break a career. Studios didn't just cast actors, they renamed them. From the raw streets of Brooklyn to the war-torn homes of Russian immigrants, these now iconic stars reinvented themselves with a signature: Marilyn Monroe. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen, a name hardly destined for fame. In 1946, a 20-year-old Norma Jean, then using her married name, Dougherty. Studio executive Ben Lyon thought Dougherty had too many pronunciations and didn't pop on a movie poster. Norma Jean herself suggested Monroe, her mother's maiden name, as a tribute to family roots. Lyon, recalling Broadway star Marilyn Miller, proposed to Marilyn to capture the same blonde allure. The combination clicked. Fox briefly floated alternatives like Claire Norman and Carol Lind, but Marilyn Monroe won out as the stage name that would soon eclipse her old identity. Years later, Marilyn paid homage to Lyon's role in her rebirth, writing, "Dear Ben, you found me, named me, and believed in me when no one else did. It was a team effort of reinvention, and by 1956, she made it official, legally becoming Marilyn Monroe." The shy Norma Jean had vanished. In her place stood Marilyn Monroe, a name that glitters in Hollywood history and hints at the poignant truth that even a legend was once a young woman imagining a new self. Audrey Hepburn. Before Audrey Hepburn was synonymous with elegance, a complex web of names surrounded her early life. She entered the world in 1929 as Audrey Kathleen Rustin, but during World War II, the young actress-to-be assumed a completely different identity. With Nazi forces occupying the Netherlands, her Dutch mother feared the Audrey sounded too English. In a bid for safety, Audrey became Etta van Heemstra, using her mother's aristocratic surname and a Dutch first name to mask her British roots. This clandestine alias allowed her to survive the war years, performing ballet for the resistance under an assumed name. When peace returned, so did her given name. Audrey's father had added Hepburn to the family name years earlier, and Audrey adopted Hepburn Rustin as a young adult. By the time the delicate ballerina was discovered for film, she was billing herself simply as Audrey Hepburn, a streamlined name that happened to echo Hollywood royalty. During the war, I was Etta. After I became Audrey again, she might have reflected. No studio head had to intervene. In the end, it was Audrey Hepburn who stepped onto the global stage, carrying traces of a hidden wartime identity, even as she made that name forever her own. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford's new name came by way of a Hollywood publicity stunt. Born Lucille Fay Lesieur, she arrived at MGM in 1925, with talent to spare but a surname the studio found problematic. Lesieur reminds me of sewer, scoffed MGM publicist Pete Smith, and studio chief Louis B. Mayer agreed. Determined to rebrand the ambitious starlet, MGM announced a Name the Star contest in a fan magazine, inviting the public to craft her stage name. Thousands of entries poured in. The winning pick was initially Joan Arden, but when it turned out another actress claimed that name, the runner-up was declared the victor, Joan Crawford. Lucille Lesieur awoke to find her name erased, and a new one bestowed by popular vote. She wasn't thrilled. "I hate the name Crawford. It sounds like crawfish," Joan later admitted, complaining that even her preferred pronunciation went ignored. But along with her misgivings came an unexpected benefit. "I liked the security that went with the name," she conceded, recognizing that the studio's investment in Joan Crawford meant a path to stardom. And indeed, under that name, she blossomed into a leading lady of the 1930s. Joan Crawford became one of Hollywood's marquee idols, a persona so convincing that it's easy to forget a young woman named Lucille ever stood in her shoes. The name born from a publicity gimmick took on a life of its own, much like the indomitable actress who answered to it, Judy Garland. A burst of laughter from a vaudeville audience was the catalyst for Judy Garland's famous name. She began life as Frances Ethel Gum, a Missouri-born girl who performed with her older sisters as the Gum Sisters. By 1934, the trio was touring the country, delighting crowds. Enter entertainer George Jessel, MC of the Chicago show. Sensing that Gum lacked the grace a child star deserved, Jessel encouraged the group to adopt a more appealing name. Several origin stories swirled about what happened next. According to one, the sisters admired film character Lily Garland and took Garland as their new surname. Another account had the girls honoring drama critic Robert Garland, or Jessel quipping they were prettier than a garland of flowers. Regardless, by late 1934, the Gum sisters had officially become the Garland sisters. Young Frances still needed a fitting first name. Inspired by a popular Hoagie Carmichael song of the day, she chose Judy for its joyful simplicity. Thus, at just 12 years old, Frances Gum transformed into Judy Garland, a name as bright as a marquee. George Jessel never tired of taking credit. "It was I who named Judy Garland, he boasted years later, explaining that Frances Gum wasn't the kind of name that so sensitive a great actress like that should have. So we called her Judy Garland. However it came to be, the new name was a perfect fit. Soon, Judy's voice was wowing MGM executives, and by 1939 she was carrying Garland into the cinematic firmament in The Wizard of Oz. The girl with the giggle-inducing name had reinvented herself as a legend, whose name would never be laughed at again, Rita Hayworth. When Rita Hayworth first danced onto the silver screen, Hollywood saw a talented Latina performer named Margarita Carmen Cancino. In the mid-1930s, young Margarita Cancino found minor roles as an exotic dancer, often alongside her Spanish-born father. But by 1937, after signing with Columbia Pictures, studio head Harry Cohn deemed her look and name too Mediterranean, fearing she'd be typecast in limited foreigner roles. The solution? Transform her into an all-American bombshell. With her first husband-manager pushing as well, Cohn insisted on a full makeover. Rita's jet-black hair was lightened to auburn, and her low hairline painfully lifted via electrolysis to give her a more Anglo-European appearance. Next came the name. Margarita's surname, Cancino, felt overtly Spanish to the studio, so Cohn and husband Edward Judson suggested she take her mother's maiden name, Hayworth. Thus, Margarita Cancino was reborn as Rita Hayworth, emphasizing her Irish-English ancestry and instantly widening her casting appeal. Even Rita's first name was truncated. The actress later acknowledged feeling torn by the change. The price of superstardom was shedding her own heritage. As her skin was lightened and her name anglicized, she navigated an identity split between private self and public persona. "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me," Rita famously said, alluding to the contrast between her most famous on-screen role and her real-life soul. Gilda was a fantasy. Rita Hayworth was the crafted ideal. But under it all remained Margarita, the Spanish dancer's daughter. Nevertheless, Hollywood's plan worked. Under her new name, Rita soared through the 1940s as a top pinup and star of films like CoverGirl and Gilda. The name Hayworth became synonymous with glamour. In the end, Rita's talent shone through any guise, but her transformation from Cancino to Hayworth stands as one of Tinseltown's most dramatic reinventions, Lauren Bacall. When 19-year-old Betty Joan Persky arrived in Hollywood, director Howard Hawks took one look at this sultry, deep-voiced newcomer and decided her name didn't suit her smoldering potential. Betty had already adopted her mother's maiden surname, Bacall, but Hawks felt Betty was too commonplace for a rising star. He signed her to a personal contract and promptly decreed a change. As her future husband Humphrey Bogart later recounted, Howard Hawks, he didn't like the name Betty, so he gave her the name Lauren. Thus, Betty Bacall became Lauren Bacall at Hawks's suggestion, a more sophisticated handle that evoked refinement and mystery. Off-screen, friends still called her Betty, but on marquees and movie posters, Lauren Bacall had an alluring lilt that helped launch her legend. Even the way it looked in print pleased the powers that be. Studio publicists loved the double L, and Bacall later quipped that by pure luck, her new first name matched her married initials. The key was Hawks's instinct that Betty didn't capture this unique young woman's presence. Indeed, with her very first film, Lauren Bacall became synonymous with smoky allure, her new name cemented in cinema history. She would always be Betty to those close to her, but to the world, she became Lauren. In Hollywood, a simple name swap can herald the arrival of an icon, and so it was for Lauren Bacall, Doris Day. In the late 1930s, a teenage Doris Mary Ann Kappelhoff began singing on local radio, her talent evident, but her last name not so much. Kappelhoff was a mouthful that didn't fit neatly on nightclub marquees. When she landed a job singing with bandleader Barney Rapp, he immediately suggested a change. Rapp thought her surname was too long and cumbersome for marquee appeal, and he had a specific inspiration in mind. Doris frequently performed a jazzy ballad called Day After Day, so Rapp proposed Doris Day as her new stage name. The young singer initially hesitated. After all, it was the name of a song, not a person, and she had been Mary or Franny to the family. But ultimately, she agreed to the makeover. As one account describes, due to the popularity of her radio performance of Day After Day, she somewhat reluctantly chose to capitalize on the association, selecting the name Doris Day. The transformation was subtle but impactful. Doris Day had a cheerful alliteration and a built-in sunny connotation, perfectly matching her lilting voice and perky persona. Under her new name, Doris found almost immediate success. By the mid-1940s, she was recording hit songs and, by 1948, starring in her first film. Audiences never knew her as anything other than Doris Day, the epitome of the wholesome American sweetheart. Looking back, Doris acknowledged that Kappelhoff would have been tough to cram onto a record label. In fact, later in life, she joked that even she was glad Rapp picked Day. It was short, joyful, and impossible to mispronounce. Thus, Doris Day was born from a song and a savvy showman's hunch, carrying a young singer to unprecedented heights and becoming one of the most beloved names in Hollywood history. Ava Gardner. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Ava Gardner did not undergo a dramatic name change, but Hollywood still toyed with her identity in curious ways. Born Ava Lavinia Gardner in rural North Carolina, she arrived in Hollywood in the early 1940s with a name that, by studio consensus, already sounded alluring. MGM signed the stunning 18-year-old largely on the strength of her looks, and they saw no need to invent a new moniker. Ava Gardner was brief, memorable, and carried an exotic hint without alienating American audiences. So Ava got to keep her birth name. Yet the studio did refine her image in other ways. Upon arrival, the Southern novice with a honey drawl was groomed extensively. Diction lessons to soften her Carolina accent, acting classes to add polish, and makeovers to amplify her natural beauty. In print, MGM's publicity occasionally fabricated a backstory to make her seem more mysterious. One odd studio press release even claimed her real name was Lucy Johnson, and Ava Gardner was the name given by MGM, a complete falsehood that confused fans for years. In truth, Ava Gardner was such a cinematic name in its own right, simple, rhythmic, and evocative, that it needed no alteration. As Ava's star rose in films like The Killers in 1946, her authentic name became world famous. She once wryly noted that MGM had considered calling her something else, but ultimately realized nothing could suit her better than Ava Gardner. In an industry of manufactured identities, Ava's remained refreshingly real. She proved that sometimes the name you're born with can shine just as brightly in lights, so long as the woman behind it has the talent to match. Hedy Lamarr. When Austrian actress Hedwig Kiesler fled Europe for Hollywood in 1937, she carried scandal and fame in equal measure. Hedwig, just 23, had shocked audiences by appearing nude in the European film Ecstasy, earning the moniker Ecstasy Lady. Now in Hollywood, MGM's mayor wanted to remake this sophisticated beauty into a star acceptable to American sensibilities. First on the agenda, shed the Kiesler and even Hedy in favor of a completely new identity. Mayer's own wife had an idea. She admired a silent-era femme fatale named Barbara Lamarr, who had been known for her stunning looks. On Mrs. Mayer's suggestion, Mayer persuaded Hedwig Kiesler to adopt the last name Lamarr as an homage to that bygone star. Hedwig's first name was trimmed to the sleek Hedy. In one stroke, an Eastern European ingenue became Hedy Lamarr, a name Mayer felt was suitably glamorous and free of ecstasy's shadows. The rationale was twofold: to make her identity more American market-friendly, and to symbolically bury the scandal. To distance herself from her real identity and the ecstasy lady reputation, he chose Lamarr, as one biography notes. Hedy Lamarr herself embraced the change, but never forgot her roots. Under her new name, she was introduced to the world in the film Algiers as an exotic unknown, and audiences gasped at the sight of this raven-haired beauty. The name Hedy Lamarr soon became synonymous with screen siren allure and, ironically, intellectual genius. The one known as Kiesler remarked in her memoirs that Hollywood had given her glamour and anonymity in equal measure. Hedy Lamarr was both, a star's name that glittered on marquees and a veil that let a former scandal queen reinvent herself in the land of opportunity. Her daring European past was eclipsed by the glow of her new name, Veronica Lake. In 1941, a petite blonde actress with an enigmatic peekaboo hairstyle captivated Hollywood, but not under her birth name of Constance Ockelman. Studio executives had grand plans for the 19-year-old starlet and felt a dramatic name change would set the stage. Producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. discovered Constance working bit parts and cast her in the World War II-era film I Wanted Wings. He decided this big break required a fresh billing. Constance's last name had already been updated to Keene during earlier modeling gigs, but Hornblow wanted something truly memorable. Together with the actress, he devised Veronica Lake. According to Lake's own recollections, she thought up the last name first, Lake, finding it striking and simple. It had a cool, liquid mystique that paired perfectly with her calm, translucent blue eyes. Hornblow agreed. As for a first name, Constance reached back into childhood and landed on Veronica. It turned out her mother had occasionally called her Veronica as a pet name. Thus, Constance Ockelman Keene transformed into Veronica Lake, a name the studio marketing team adored for its poetic imagery. The best synthetic name in pictures that has been recently created is Veronica Lake, declared producer David O. Selznick around that time, praising its originality. Under her new moniker, Veronica Lake became an overnight sensation. Her 1940s films cemented her as a film noir icon, and the name Veronica Lake itself entered the pop culture lexicon, evoking a vision of blonde hair cascading over one eye. Lake later wrote that changing her name helped change her luck. I came to California as Constance Keene. I became Veronica Lake overnight. While the reinvention was carefully engineered, there was genuine personal input behind it. Veronica Lake was a star's name that the star herself had helped choose. In doing so, she gave up ordinary Constance and glided into Hollywood legend as the one and only Veronica Lake. Ginger Rogers. Not all Hollywood name changes were dictated by studio moguls. Some happened naturally long before fame. Ginger Rogers is a prime example. She entered the world in 1911 as Virginia Catherine McMath, but from toddlerhood, everyone called her Ginger. Family lore tells of a young cousin unable to pronounce Virginia, adorably sputtering Ginja, and the nickname Ginger stuck for life. When her mother Layla remarried in 1920, Virginia took on her stepfather's surname, Rogers. By her teen years, the aspiring dancer was already performing as Ginger Rogers, a name as peppy and memorable as her footwork. In fact, 14-year-old Ginger won a Texas Charleston contest under that name and launched a vaudeville career shortly after. Thus, by the time Hollywood came calling in the early 1930s, the energetic blonde had a ready-made stage name that studios found ideal. No further change needed. Still, the transformation from Virginia McMath to Ginger Rogers is fascinating in its own right. It was a grassroots change powered by family and circumstance rather than publicity departments. Ginger later acknowledged how pivotal that shift was. After her parents' acrimonious divorce and a childhood of being shuttled among relatives, adopting her stepdad's last name represented stability. She didn't consider herself a McMath anymore. It was Ginger Rogers, if you please, and she was destined to do great things. One biographer quipped of her mindset as a young performer. And indeed, as Ginger Rogers, she danced into Hollywood history alongside Fred Astaire, completing the famous duo whose names are forever linked. Audiences likely never knew she had ever been called anything else. Ginger's case shows that sometimes A nickname born of love and a pragmatic surname swap can create a star's name organically. Carole Lombard. The elegant name Carole Lombard evolved in stages, mirroring the actress's ascent from small-town girl to Hollywood royalty. She started out as Jane Alice Peters, a spirited tomboy from Indiana. When Jane began acting in low-budget silent films as a teenager, her first studio, Fox Films, deemed Jane Peters too plain for their budding starlet. According to Lombard's own recollection, legendary producer David O. Selznick and stage impresario David Belasco were mulling over her name when Belasco shook his head. "She can't go on as Ruby Stevens. Sounds like a burlesque queen's name," he said. Oops, mixing her up with another actress, Ruby Stevens. In truth, young Jane Peters had briefly been billed as Carole at Fox, and Lombard was chosen in tribute to a family friend. It's said that Jane picked Lombard after an old acquaintance, Hedy Lamarr, hoping it sounded distinguished. By 1925, she was appearing in credits as Carole Lombard. The final tweak came around 1930. A publicist's typo on a theater program allegedly added an E to her first name, printing it as Carole. Rather than see it as a mistake, the actress liked the extra flourish. It gave a touch of French sophistication. So Carole became Carole, and the Carole Lombard we know was born. She legally adopted the name in 1936, by which time she was a marquee star of screwball comedies and one half of Hollywood's hottest power couple. Lombard often joked about her name change. In one interview, she quipped that adding the E was her attempt at balancing my name, like a good title. Whether by luck or pure talent, Carole Lombard became a revered name, gracing classics like My Man Godfrey. It's hard to imagine movie history without it. From Jane to Carole, every iteration marked a step toward immortality. The final form, Carole Lombard, shining forever as the queen of screwball comedy. Ann Sothern. Ann Sothern was the third identity for a North Dakota girl born Harriet Arlene Lake. As a young performer in the early 1930s, Harriet Lake enjoyed some success, even appearing on Broadway. But when Hollywood beckoned, a makeover was in order, she landed a contract with Columbia Pictures in 1934. Columbia's boss, Harry Cohn, seeking to mold her into a leading lady, decided a new name and look would help. Harriet's hair was bleached platinum blonde, aligning her with the bombshell archetype, and the studio had her name changed to Ann Sothern as part of the package. The origin of Sothern is sometimes attributed to the great stage actor E.H. Sothern, giving her a last name that resonated with theatrical prestige. Ann was chosen for its simple, girl-next-door quality, a contrast to more elaborate Hollywood names. The transformation was swift. By 1935, film credits listed Ann Sothern in place of Harriet Lake. She later quipped that she barely knew who Harriet was anymore. Indeed, as Ann Sothern, she became a fixture in B-movie musicals and comedies, eventually hitting her stride as the wisecracking heroine of the Maisie film series at MGM. The studio-driven name change clearly paid off. It was like putting on a new costume. Suddenly I was Ann. Sothern reflected in an interview, noting how the shift boosted her confidence. In the 1940s, she even carried her adopted name to radio and television, starring in Private Secretary as a character often referred to by her real name, Susie, Harriet Lake. That inside joke aside, the world knew her only as Ann Sothern, Debbie Reynolds. 16-year-old Mary Frances Reynolds never planned on movie stardom, and certainly not on answering to Debbie. In 1948, this sunny high schooler from Burbank, California, entered a local beauty pageant on a lark. To everyone's surprise, she won. Mary Frances was soon offered a film contract, but Warner studio chief Jack L. Warner had one immediate request: lose the old-fashioned double name. "We've already got too many Marys and Frannies," he might have said. Warner himself bestowed the name Debbie on her, feeling it was youthful, fresh, and easy to remember. Thus, Debbie Reynolds was born at a studio executive's stroke of the pen. She made her screen debut that same year, and by 1950, MGM had scooped up her contract from Warner Brothers, grooming Debbie into a musical comedy star. In later years, Debbie laughed about the change. "I was Mary Frances at home, but the second I walked through the studio gates, I became Debbie. And Debbie I stayed," she said, noting that even her parents eventually called her by the stage name. The quick renaming by Jack Warner was a small change that catalyzed a huge career. Debbie herself acknowledged that her original name probably wouldn't have fit on theater marquees. Literally, Lana Turner. The transformation of Lana Turner from the girl next door to a Hollywood siren began with a chance encounter and ended with the director's brainstorm for a new name, born Julia Jean Mildred Frances Turner. In 1921, she acquired the childhood nickname Judy. But Hollywood had other ideas. As legend has it, 16-year-old Judy Turner was sipping a Coke at a Sunset Boulevard malt shop in 1937 when she was spotted by journalist William Wilkerson, who referred her to talent agent Zeppo Marx. Soon Judy found herself introduced to director Mervyn LeRoy, who was struck by her beauty and signed her to Warner Brothers for an upcoming film. LeRoy loved everything about his new protege. Drawing on his fondness for history, LeRoy suggested Lana, inspired by the tragic heroine Lana in a novel he'd read, or perhaps simply because it sounded sensual and unique. As for a surname, Turner's own last name was strong and simple, so it stayed. Thus, Judy was reborn, as Lana Turner studio executive Winfield Sheehan concurred. He reportedly added John to Marion Morrison's new name and similarly gave his nod to Lana Turner, finding it catchy. Lana herself embraced the new identity with surprising ease. Her very first film billed her as Lana Turner, and it indeed made audiences forget any trace of Julia. The name's allure was immediate, short, exotic, and just a tad mysterious. Hollywood publicity touted Lana Turner as a new discovery, carefully omitting that she'd ever answered to anything else. And within a few years, courtesy of films like Ziegfeld Girl and The Postman Always Rings Twice, Lana Turner became one of the brightest stars of the 1940s. The girl who had been known as Judy to friends was Lana to the world, Cary Grant. To invent the debonair Cary Grant, Hollywood transformed a former English acrobat named Archibald Leach into a timeless icon. Born and raised in Bristol, with a name that hardly whispered leading man, Archie struggled with a childhood filled with hardships. By the early 1930s, he was touring American vaudeville under the temporary alias Carrie Lockwood after a character he'd once portrayed on Broadway. However, when Paramount Pictures spotted the potential in the tall, dashing Brit, they decided Lockwood and Leach were too cumbersome for the silver screen. Studio executive B.P. Schulberg insisted on a name with American flair. He provided a pre-approved list of surnames, and Archibald chose Grant. With that single paperwork tweak in 1932, Cary Grant was born. The transformation was pragmatic and symbolic. Archibald Leach was seen as too foreign and clunky for the romantic leading man that America craved. In contrast, Cary Grant sounded crisp, stylish, and modern, a name perfectly suited to a suave, cosmopolitan persona. Later in his career, Grant quipped, "I pretended to be somebody I wanted to be, and I finally became that person, or he became me." This playful admission encapsulated the deliberate self-invention that Hollywood demanded. With his new name, Cary Grant transcended his humble beginnings and became a byword for elegance and wit in classic cinema. Natalie Wood. The child who would enchant Hollywood as Natalie Wood began life with an old-world name, Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko. Born in 1938 to Russian immigrant parents, little Natalia was affectionately called Natasha at home, a name full of warmth and heritage. After her family settled in California during the Depression, her father anglicized their surname to Gurdon in hopes of better prospects. As a toddler, Natasha Zakharenko transformed into Natasha Gurdon, a name she carried when she landed her first small film role at the tender age of 4. In 1945, director Irving Pichel recognized the unique potential in the dark-haired Natasha. Convinced that a more American-sounding name would better suit her burgeoning career, Pichel proposed Natalie Wood. He explained that Natalie was simply the English variant of Natalia, preserving a piece of her past while offering a fresh start. The surname Wood was chosen in tribute to Pichel's friend, director Sam Wood, a nod to Hollywood's creative kinship. Her stage mother, Maria, embraced the change wholeheartedly, even adopting the new surname for herself. By the time Natasha's new identity graced the marquee at age 7 in Miracle on 34th Street, the transformation was complete. Natalie Wood soon soared as one of Hollywood's top child stars, a name that perfectly balanced her heritage with the polished allure demanded by the silver screen. Though she privately remembered her roots as Natasha, the world would forever know her as Natalie Wood. Kirk Douglas. Born Isur Danielovich. To poor Jewish immigrants, the future Kirk Douglas faced the weight of a foreign name in a prejudiced era. Growing up in New York speaking Yiddish at home, Isur's name was a constant reminder of his outsider status. To assimilate and succeed in America, he first adopted the nickname Izzy Dembski, a modified version of the family name his parents had unofficially used. This alias helped him navigate life as he worked his way through St. Lawrence University and the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, all while nurturing dreams of an acting career. With the onset of World War II in 1941, Izzy enlisted in the Navy. Before shipping out, he made a decisive change. He legally altered his name to Kirk Douglas. He later admitted, "I knew Isur Danielovich was too Jewish for Hollywood," acknowledging that the original name might have closed doors before he even stepped onto a film set. The new name was chosen for its strength. Kirk provided a hard, punchy beginning, while Douglas was simple and memorable. After the war, bolstered by support from friends like Lauren Bacall, Kirk soon landed his first film role. As audiences watched him in movies like Champion and Ace in the Hole, the name Kirk Douglas came to embody a robust, all-American hero. Despite privately cherishing his heritage and sometimes playfully using Izzy among family, the persona of Kirk Douglas was here to stay, a name that redefined one man's destiny in mid-century Hollywood. John Wayne. Hollywood's alchemy transformed a lanky Iowa native named Marion Morrison into the quintessential cowboy, John Wayne, in a matter of moments. In 1930, director Raoul Walsh discovered 22-year-old Marion, a former USC football player working as a Fox Studios prop man with a raw, unrefined allure. Though Walsh admired his careless strength, he found the name Marion Morrison far too delicate for the rugged, larger-than-life heroes he envisioned for the silver screen. Collaborating with Fox executive Winfield Sheehan, Walsh sought a name that resonated with masculinity. Drawing inspiration from American history, Walsh suggested Anthony Wayne, referencing the renowned Revolutionary War general, Mad Anthony Wayne. Sheehan then refined it further by contributing John for its solid, monosyllabic punch, and thus Marion Morrison was rechristened as John Wayne. Remarkably, the young actor was unaware of the change until he spotted his new name emblazoned on a film poster. Eager to embrace his destiny, he soon transformed the name into an icon of rugged American masculinity. Despite the early commercial failure of The Big Trail, John Wayne's persona steadily evolved through dozens of westerns, ultimately crystallizing in classics like Stagecoach. In later interviews, Wayne acknowledged, "It's not the name I was born with, but it's the name that made me who I am." That statement captured the essence of his reinvention, a name that transcended its origins to become synonymous with enduring American grit and heroism. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck's journey began when Ruby Catherine Stevens stepped onto Broadway in 1926, only to have her destiny altered by producer David Belasco. The Brooklyn-born chorus girl's original name, Ruby Stevens, was deemed too earthy, a relic more fitting for a burlesque performer than a leading lady. Belasco, ever the visionary, was flipping through an old program when an English actress named Jane Stanwyck appeared in a play titled Barbara Frietchie. At that moment, he proclaimed, "She can't go on as Ruby Stevens. Let her be Barbara Stanwyck." Thus, borrowing the first name from the play's heroine and the surname from the actress, the new identity was forged. Ruby Stevens embraced the change, aware that a name was a powerful tool in Hollywood's arsenal. By the time she relocated to Los Angeles in 1929, she was known as Barbara Stanwyck, a name that radiated sophistication and promise. Her breakout performance in Ladies of Leisure confirmed that the rebranding had been a masterstroke. The name, with its musical cadence, rolled off the tongue, lending an air of dignity even to her tougher roles. Although journalists occasionally prodded for the real story behind her new moniker, Stanwyck coyly maintained the mystique by simply stating, "It's a combination of names from a playbill." Over a remarkable career spanning 4 decades and more than 80 films, Barbara Stanwyck became synonymous with strength and versatility, a shining star whose name carried the weight of a storied legacy. Her transformation from Ruby Stevens to Barbara Stanwyck remains one of Hollywood's most compelling reinventions. Rock Hudson. The creation of Rock Hudson is perhaps Hollywood's most literal example of manufacturing a star. In 1947, Roy Harold Shearer Jr., a tall, strapping truck driver from Illinois, arrived in Los Angeles with dreams of movie fame. Already having changed his surname from Shearer to Fitzgerald after a stepfather's influence, Roy found himself under the guidance of talent agent Henry Wilson, a man notorious for crafting memorable stage names. Wilson believed that Roy needed a name that resonated with rugged strength and American grandeur. Drawing inspiration from nature and geography, Wilson selected Rock to evoke the steadfastness of the Rock of Gibraltar and paired it with Hudson, inspired by the mighty Hudson River. With this new moniker, Roy Fitzgerald vanished, replaced by the persona of Rock Hudson, a name as robust and enduring as the man himself. Wilson's transformation wasn't limited to the name. He ensured that Hudson's teeth were capped and his manners polished to perfection, preparing him for a life in the spotlight. When Rock Hudson made his debut in 1948, studio publicists eagerly spun a narrative of rugged strength and American vigor around him. Standing 6'4" with chiseled features, he soon became Universal's leading man in romantic comedies and melodramas. Although privately, Roy struggled with the burden of a fabricated identity, the public adored Rock Hudson as the embodiment of the idealized American hero. The name not only redefined his career, but became an everlasting symbol of classic cinema and the power of reinvention.